Welcome to EUPrivacyForAll, Session 62 on GDPR, Article 70, Tasks of the Board. Article 70, regarding the tasks of the European Data Protection Board, lays down that the Board shall ensure the consistent application of the GDPR, and to that end shall, on its own initiative or where relevant, at the request of the Commission, monitor and ensure the application of the consistency mechanisms without prejudice to the tasks of national supervisory authorities, advise the Commission regarding notably new amendment of the GDPR, advise the Commission on the format and procedures of the exchange of information between controllers, processes, and supervisory authorities regarding binding corporate rules, issue guidelines, recommendations, and best practices regarding the erasure of links, copies, or replications of personal data, notably in the frame of the right to be forgotten, examine on its own initiative or on the request of one of its members or on request of the Commission any question regarding the application of the GDPR, issue guidelines, recommendations, and best practices regarding profiling, regarding the notification of personal data breaches, or the definition of high risks for the rights and freedoms of natural persons, or the criteria and requirements for personal data transfers based on binding corporate rules, or regarding the transfers on the basis of derogations for specific situations. Draw up guidelines for supervisory authorities regarding the fixing of administrative fines, the review of practical application of the guidelines regarding this fixing of administrative fines, issue guidelines, recommendations, and best practices, notably concerning the common procedures for reporting by natural persons of infringements of the regulation, encourage the drawing up of codes of conduct and the establishment of certification mechanisms, carry out the accreditation of certification bodies, and encouraging the maintaining of public registers of accredited body and of accredited controllers and processors, specifying the requirements mentioned in the Article 43 on accreditation with a view to the accreditation of certification bodies, and provide the Commission with an opinion on the certification requirements. Additionally, provide the Commission with an opinion regarding the icons used to inform natural persons, provide the Commission with an opinion for the assessment of the adequacy level of protection in third countries, international organizations, or sectors, issue opinions on draft decisions of supervisory authorities pursuant to the consistency mechanisms, promote the cooperation and the effective bilateral and multilateral exchange of information and best practices between the supervisory authorities, promote common training programs and facilitate personal exchanges between the supervisory authorities and the supervisory authorities of third countries or international organizations, promote the exchange of knowledge and documentation on data protection legislation and practice with data protection supervisory authorities worldwide, issue opinions on codes of conduct drawn up at EU level, maintain a publicly accessible electronic register of decisions taken by supervisory authorities and courts on issues handled in the consistency mechanism. Where the Commission requests advice from the Board, it may indicate a time limit. The Board shall forward its opinions, guidelines, recommendations, and best practices to the Commission and make them public. The Board shall, where appropriate, consult interested parties and give them the opportunity to comment within a reasonable period. The Board makes the results of the consultation procedure publicly available. The Directive 95/46 refers, in Article 30 on sanctions, on the parts to be played by the working party and by the Commission. For instance, the working party, finding divergences likely to affect the equivalence of protection for persons with regard to the processing of personal data in the community, between the laws or practices of member states, shall inform the Commission accordingly. What should accountable data controllers and processors get prepared for? The board will replace the Working Party 29 and will have to ensure a consistent application of the GDPR and carry out the following tasks: advise EU Commission, issue guidelines, recommendations and best practices on a whole set of provisions from the GDPR, monitor consistency mechanisms and issue opinions on supervisory authorities' drafts, promote supervisory authorities' exchanges of information and training programs, maintain a publicly accessible electronic register of decisions taken by the supervisory authorities and by the courts on issues dealt with in the consistency mechanism, carry out the accreditation of certification bodies and maintain a public register of accredited bodies and accredited controllers and processors, encourage the drawing up of codes of conduct, and finally, publicly consult interested parties where appropriate. So the question triggered now is knowing what does mean interested parties.